U.S. Department of Defense spent the entire meaty part of the smartphone adoption curve fighting counterterrorism mission, where the adversary was not especially technically sophisticated. So when the Pentagon shifted focus and U.S. national security shifted focus to near-peer adversaries, all of a sudden those are technically sophisticated actors.
I'm going to translate what you just said for a second. Russia and China have strong hackers. Al-Qaeda did not. Welcome to the Emergent podcast, where we interview product and startup leaders from emerging technology companies about their work in the trenches to bring the hardest and most impactful technologies to life. Today's guest is John Doyle. John is the founder and CEO of Cape, America's privacy-first mobile carrier. Before founding Cape, John spent 9 years at Palantir Technologies, where he ran the national security business. John was also previously staff sergeant in the Special Forces, which is where he first learned about the importance of secure communications. John is a graduate of Knox College and Harvard Law School. In this episode, we dive into the concerning reality of mobile cellular data insecurity on major networks and how nation-state hackers are exploiting these loopholes while the carriers themselves are also legally monetizing your personal information. We explore the concept of ubiquitous technical surveillance, describing how it's virtually impossible to move through modern society without leaving behind digital traces. We discuss Cape's innovative approaches to building a software-defined mobile carrier that operates as a core layer on top of existing physical cell towers. Unlike traditional providers who prioritize fraud prevention over privacy, Cape embraces a philosophy of minimal data collection and retention. John shares insights on the company's development journey, explaining how shifting away from counterterrorism and warfighting operations sparked the idea, and recounts the challenge of convincing a major network carrier to allow Cape's software integration. The conversation examines the diverse demographic profiles that are interested in privacy-first cellular services, from high-net-worth individuals to domestic violence survivors, extending well beyond military and intelligence communities. We talk about the initial MVP features, such as decoupling user IDs from personal identities to prevent correlation and implementing encrypted voicemail. We cover how Cape markets a product that's designed to prevent negative outcomes rather than creating positive ones. John explains their deliberate staffing strategy of hiring opinionated, highly technical professionals, often unfamiliar with telecom industry norms, to avoid being constrained by conventional thinking, and also describes their once-around-the-world training approach for new team members to come up to speed. And now, a word from our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by Propel Auth. Startups and corporate innovation teams routinely waste months building core user authentication and authorization flows into their products. Propel Auth has automated all the most important pieces of the user management lifecycle. Instantly set up wait lists, magic links, social login, user impersonation, user management, role-based access control, SAML integrations for enterprise, team management, and much more. With Propel Auth, each of these challenges takes just a few lines of code instead of months of development and integration time. And with thoughtful control over design and skinning, it's easy to keep your product fully on brand. Get a generous free starter pack that scales through 1,000 monthly active users, or mention Emergent25 to receive 25% off for the first 6 months for more mature products. Get back to building your actual product and let Propel Auth handle your user management needs. Visit Propel Auth, that's PROPELAUTH.com to learn more. John, pumped to have you, man. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Adam. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's set the stage. What's so bad about existing mobile phone carriers and the way that they operate now in terms of user privacy?
Sure. That's a great place to start. If you look at the last 12 months as an example, all three of the major carriers in the US have had significant data breaches, customer data breaches. Last year, really notably, AT&T lost the call data records of effectively all of their subscribers for going back several years. So if you picture this as a knowledge graph, that's all the AT&T subscribers, where they were, who they talked to, either over voice or over text, where they were when they connected to the internet. Huge amount of information, really significant implications for the personal privacy of the subscribers, and certainly has national security implications as well. And then if you put the breaches aside, Also last year, the FCC fined all three major carriers hundreds of millions of dollars for monetizing subscriber data. That same data I just mentioned as being breached, they were also just actively selling it to data aggregators, to the government for warrantless surveillance programs, and to other buyers as well. There's a problem called malicious signaling. So there are these two kind of twin protocols, SS7 and Diameter, that govern a lot of how people roam around the global cell network. They're there for really good reason, but they have significant vulnerabilities that can be exploited by malicious actors to do geolocation, intercept calls and texts of victims. Millions of reported incidents of malicious signaling last year. And the last one I'll mention is SIM swap attacks. If you're not familiar with a SIM swap attack, this is where I walk into, say, a T-Mobile store holding a phone, and I say, "Hi, I'm Adam Judelson. I lost my phone. I'd like you to point my phone number to this new phone that I just bought so I can keep using it." And they either are convinced by your story, or you bribe them, or you threaten them. But one way or another, they point Adam Judelson's phone number at this new phone, and now I, the attacker, have access to reset your bank password, reset your email password. This is how the FCC's Twitter account got hacked last year, if you remember that.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a rapidly growing year-over-year problem in the United States.
This is
So,
nuts. Like I don't even feel like most of these stories made headline news, or if they did, maybe for like a quarter of a news cycle.
right. They all get in the news. There are people certainly that report on them, and people that care about them, but it's become such a constant drumbeat that it just, I don't think it doesn't register in your mind the way that it probably should. And my personal hypothesis and why we started the company is that we've all just like entered this state of learned helplessness around, you have to have a cell phone, right? You have to be connected. That's not really an option for almost anyone in the world today. And you haven't had until now um, a solution out there to be connected and have a working premium cellular service without giving up your privacy and security in all the ways I just listed.
Yeah, fascinating. Okay. And so when most of us sign our mobile contracts, we're actually giving them permission to sell to data brokers a lot of times. Can you give us a little background on that? And also, I have a little bit of a privacy background as well, but I'm not sure everyone knows what a data broker is. Maybe provide a little context there as well.
Yeah, I mean, so yes, when you sign your contract with basically any carrier outside of Cape, you should read the terms of service. You probably don't. Most people don't. But there's almost certainly, in fact, there is language in there authorizing them to monetize your personal data. So then what they do with that, and people, I think you don't, Adam, because you've been in this space, but people maybe underestimate the value that their personal data has to third parties, primarily to advertisers, right? So there's an entire industry, an enormous industry that exists to aggregate geolocation and online activity data for people all around the world, and then sell it to advertisers who use that to build composite profiles of people that they might want to sell widgets to, right? And they decide who's the most likely buyer of a widget and when in their day are they most likely to buy a widget, and they can target them an ad. That's really, really valuable information. So there's an enormous sort of shadowy industry that exists to aggregate and sell that data.
Yeah. And what about, tell us a little bit when you first told me about your company a long time ago, I remember that you gave this really interesting explanation about how every time a phone call needs to be connected, that there's basically a lookup that happens. And a lot of the information in that lookup is public. Can you kind of explain how that infrastructure works now for traditional carriers?
Right. So when I talk about SS7 and Diameter, that's what I'm talking about. In order to connect calls globally, or in order to pass roamers around the world, um, the carriers need a way to communicate with each other sort of out of band about where is a given subscriber and where is the subscriber going. And there's the lookup example I gave you about connecting a call. There's a really good example we've been using recently, Notional. I'm about to talk about Taylor Swift, and I want to be clear, this is not really a story about Taylor Swift. But if Taylor gets on her private jet in Nashville and is flying to Berlin, pretend she's a T-Mobile subscriber, she gets on her plane and she switches on airplane mode, and then she takes off on like a 9-hour flight. There's a window in there that oftentimes gets exploited by malicious actors, where I can pose as, or I can be a malicious telco, and uh, send T-Mobile a message that says, "Hey, Taylor just landed in Beijing. I'm China Mobile, right? Taylor just landed in Beijing. Please route all of her traffic to me because she's roaming on my network now and she's attached." That's a perfectly, there's in the States, that's a perfectly normal, valid request. And so T-Mobile historically has honored those requests and started to route that traffic. It's obviously problematic. So what a lot of the carriers have done is implement velocity checks. It's a firewall. And when T-Mobile gets this request now from Beijing, say it's 2 hours into Taylor's flight, T-Mobile's firewall says, wait, there's no way she can be in Beijing. She only turned off her phone in Nashville 2 hours ago. So I'm not going to honor that request. It's a pretty good solve. The problem is adversaries have evolved their tactics now. And
Yeah, it's pretty naive. Like it's a good first
right.
step, but it's a naive solution to that problem, right?
So the new requests have started to come from the Bahamas as an example, right? And now
Oh, right. Somewhere closer.
all right, so it's feasible that Taylor could have landed in the Bahamas. And so now those requests are going to the Bahamas. So what Cape does, or as an example of how we build this stuff, we do a simple on its face. It's actually really complicated and hard to build. But when we get an incoming request like that saying, hey, update T-Swift's location to the Bahamas, we just query her device over an authenticated connection. And we say, are you in the Bahamas or not? And if it says yes, then we honor the request. And if it says no, then we don't. There's a lot of pieces you have to build to make that work performantly. But anyway, you asked the question, you got a more detailed answer than you were looking for.
Yeah, yeah. But I also now know that you're probably a Swiftie because you said T Swift instead of Taylor Swift as well. So
Yeah, the father of a 7-year-old girl, so I'm a de facto Swiftie.
of course, myself as well. Tell us about this term, ubiquitous technical surveillance. It's a term I hadn't heard until you and I started talking about CAPE, but it seems to be a major one for sort of underpinning why we should be concerned in general.
Sure. Ubiquitous technical surveillance is a sort of classic overcomplicated government description or government acronym, UTS, for a really simple concept, which is privacy. But UTS is how the national security community talks about the overall state of affairs, where it's really hard to go anywhere in the world and do anything without being observable and without being watched. And that's because of all the digitally enabled ways we live our lives. Certainly cell phones are a big part of that. Other examples are when you get on a flight, that generates data about where you're traveling from and where you're traveling to. You make an online payment. There's a trail built out, what payment method did you use? Where did the package get shipped to? What did you buy? There's just all this incredible amounts of data feeding among. Certainly the data aggregator, ad ID or advertising industry we talked about, but also the national security complex in other countries.
And so you gave us a little bit of a window into a piece of CAPE's solution, but can you help me understand and the audience understand what did CAPE do to build an alternative reality to this problem where nation states are spying on you, data brokers are getting your information because, page 17 of the contract said it was okay. Like, what are you guys doing about that?
Right. So when you really break it down, there are a lot of ways that your personal data is compromised by virtue of using a cell phone. A surprising number of those, it's tempting to think it's all app problems. Like when I dial an Uber, the car comes to my house and therefore Uber knows where I am. And that certainly is an issue, whether you do or don't trust Uber is kind of a personal decision. But a surprising number of the issues and problems live at the network layer. The SS7 diameter that I just described is a great example. SIM swapping is another one where it's the network updating, where does this phone number point? It used to be to your phone, now it's to my phone. These are network issues. So the kind of core realization, or the first realization of the company, was you need network footprint to solve network problems. Very hard, if not impossible, to build a device or build an app that solves these really deep, sort of fundamental to the network issues. So what we've done is build a cellular network, a mobile network from scratch, holding privacy and security as first principles. So that means going down one layer deeper. And to be clear, we haven't built any towers, right? We're not putting up cell towers all around the US. We rent.
Yeah, that was my first question when you first told me about this. And then you explained, is the term MVNO, mobile virtual network operator?
That's right.
And that's sort of like a thin layer on top of all of that physical infrastructure?
So traditionally, yes. So there are a lot of MVNOs in the US. A really famous one is called Mint Mobile. They Ryan Reynolds as the spokesperson. And they're a very thin layer on top of T-Mobile's physical network. And that's fine because their whole goal was to compete on price. Excuse me. And so they use not only T-Mobile's towers, but also they rent space on the software that runs T-Mobile's network. And they're effectively just like marketing and customer support on top of that. What Cape has done that's so different is we built an MVNO, but from the beginning insisted on owning as much of the software that runs the network as possible. So there's this thing called the mobile core that kind of sits at the middle of that software stack. There's all these associated integrations and plug-in points to connect your calls, connect you to the internet, hook it up when you dial 911, do all the different things you expect from your cell phone. And we own effectively all of that, all the software that drives the network. So we have all this footprint to build features to solve the problems that we're talking about.
And this is what you guys are calling a software-defined mobile carrier?
A software-defined mobile carrier, that's right.
Got it. What are like some of the small tactical things that means get captured and considered that would not normally be, like when it's a thin layer instead of your Fort Knox layer? Like what are some of the things that you have to add into that network software layer?
Yeah, it's a great question. And let me back up. Let me tee up my answer by saying this. A traditional telco, the big three in the US, certainly have cybersecurity programs, but they've been designed from the beginning and grown up around the goal of basically preventing people from making calls for free on the network. Right? That was the big problem in the 90s and the 2000s and counter today is don't let people fraudulently use the network because that's theft. So it makes sense why you would have that goal, but your security program looks very different if that's your primary objective versus protecting your subscribers from privacy breaches and security breaches.
Yeah, didn't Steve Jobs and Wozniak build some sort of hack like that in the late 80s or something where they
Yeah,
made international calls for free?
there was this thing where you could if you played a tone that was 2600 hertz into the microphone on a payphone, that was like a technician's trick to unlock the phone so they could work on it. And then they basically built a box, I think, if the story is right, that like allowed that to scale. And they could just
Yeah.
sell international access to everybody for really cheap.
Yeah. So step one was, can we actually connect calls? Step two was, we have networks that can now connect calls. And step three is, now how do we prevent people from abusing that for free? And then
Right.
step four is where you guys come in, which is, how do we actually make that a secure experience from the very beginning, starting at the most root layers?
Yeah. And you asked the question, like, what do you actually build to do that?
Yeah.
A really good specific example is in that software stack I'm talking about, there's something called the BSS, which is the billing system. It is where you keep your list of subscribers and what rate plan they're on and how many minutes did they burn last month and all the rest. There are a few of those out there that any carrier buys off the shelf. None of them are optimized to operate a functioning premium telco, but minimize collection of subscriber data. In fact, they're all designed the opposite way, which is to sort of maximize collection of subscriber data.
Because it's an asset to companies that are reselling it, right?
Yeah. And no one ever stopped to think like, I might want to operate a telco without knowing everyone's social security number.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
hadn't occurred to anyone, sort of. And so we evaluated the what was on the market and learned there was nothing that could actually operate a telco according to one of our core principles, which is collect the minimal amount of data required to operate a functioning telco and retain it for the minimal amount of time required to operate a functioning telco. So what that means for us is we collect basically nothing about our subscribers other than a zip code and their phone number. And we only retain records for 60 days versus, the bigs keep them for 7 years, 10 years. They keep them forever. And they have your mother's maiden name and your social security number and your street address and all the rest.
Yeah.
So
I'm trying to think of an analogy. I feel like it's almost like if you went to CVS and in order to park your car, you had to first hand over the deed to your house, everything about your car, everything about your family, everyone who's in it, give them your credit card, and then you're allowed to park in the parking space. And you're just saying, hey, wouldn't it be nice if you could just park, like only show up and park and then transact?
Yeah. And
Cool.
I think it's a good analogy, and to torture it just a little bit, one of the the reasons we built the company is, yes, it's like the parking garage at CVS, but there are no alternatives in the world. You're not allowed to not park your car. And you have to park it in one of these garages, right? You know, you can't function without a cell phone, basically. Uh, I recently came to the realization that if you tell me right now you have a friend who doesn't own a cell phone, my assumption has flipped over the last 10 years. 10 years ago, I would have said that person probably doesn't have very much money. Now I would say that person is probably exceptionally rich, right? They're like independently wealthy. And then so they've achieved enough status where they no longer have to own a cell phone.
Yeah, someone else handles the communications for
Whatever.
them.
Yeah, that's a privilege now to not own a mobile phone.
This episode is brought to you by Flykitt, Flykitt, the first full solution to jet lag. This might seem hard to believe, but I've flown from Los Angeles to Tokyo and back with virtually no jet lag using Flykitt. Based on research with Navy SEALs and fighter pilots, the Flykitt team discovered that long flights cause inflammation in addition to disrupting your circadian rhythm. And they figured out how to solve both these challenges using a customized program for when to eat, sleep, and use their patented supplements and blue light blocking glasses. It's simple to follow, and you don't have to change anything before your travel day. With Flykitt, more than 90% of people can sleep well in Europe, Asia, or anywhere else in the world on night one. Visit flykitt.com and use coupon code FLYWITHEMERGENT to get 15% off Flykitt. Let's go way back in the journey here. How did you initially hatch this idea before starting the company? What was your, the term that I like to use now is -1 to 0 that I've heard used in a couple other contexts. What was your -1 to 0? In other words, before you actually said, let's build a founding team, let's actually start building something. How'd you come up with this?
Yeah. So briefly, my background is Army Special Forces, 2003 to 2008. And then when I left the Army, I went to law school. Figured out pretty quickly I never wanted to be a lawyer. And so, we have shared history. And the way that people did in 2012, I sort of fell into working at Palantir and spent the better part of 10 years at Palantir. To answer your question, then, how did I come across these problems? How did I come to start the company? I did a lot of things at Palantir, as we all did in those days. My sort of signature contribution was running the national security business for my last 5 years there. And working with those customers and having that kind of exposure and doing that work made me really acutely aware of all the problems that exist on the global cell network. That list I gave at the beginning, I was just like really intimately familiar with that list from my seat at Palantir. And I recognized the insight that I shared with you, which is these are all network problems. They're hard, they're really, really important, but they seem solvable. And so in 2022, I left Palantir to start.
But did you see, generals running around getting their phones spied on? Like why this particular problem? Like, was there some sort of symptom or catalyst that got you thinking about this, or was this because like one of the most interesting topics in startups is, do you do a bunch of research and then choose your initial landing point, or do you wait until you see something, or is it some sort of hybrid? Like, what was it for you?
It was sort of, it was a hybrid. I would say there's a real market opportunity, which is the U.S. Department of Defense spent the entire meaty part of the smartphone adoption curve fighting counterterrorism mission, really important mission, where the adversary was not especially technically sophisticated. And so we, including the military force, were all out adopting smartphone technology. And the Pentagon didn't really need to worry about the implications defensively because the primary adversary couldn't exploit that fact. And when the Pentagon shifted focus and U.S. national security shifted focus to near-peer adversaries, all of a sudden those are technically sophisticated actors. And so there was a real need that I saw for someone to be thinking in a first-class way about how do we mitigate all these threats.
Yeah, I'm going to translate what you just said for a second. Russia and China have strong hackers. Al-Qaeda did not. Is that fair?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
yeah.
Cool. I just, for you and I, we understand this very well, but not everybody has the national security background. So I want to kind of make it approachable for them on it. So, okay. So
Yeah.
that's interesting. So you saw that. Go ahead.
Yeah, but the other half of the story is I just, I'm a naturally, I naturally value privacy as a person. I adopt privacy preserving technology in my personal life. I'm passionate about it. And so I just saw a big opportunity to do something really cool, a huge set of unsolved problems in an enormous, enormous industry that just has done nothing to address them. So it's
Yeah, yeah.
a great challenge.
What's the motivation for you? And I know this is a little bit of a squishy one, but I'll share. I know we both know John Grant, who was the first privacy and civil liberties engineer at Palantir. And I always thought his explanation of why privacy inherently matters is so interesting. He would say something to the effect of, if you don't have private space, some of the best, most creative things that you can ever produce won't happen because people don't feel as comfortable doing certain things when they think that they're being watched. Is that what it is for you? Do you have a different inner motivation?
I agree. That's a really sort of classic in the canon of privacy arguments. That's a classic. And I think it's a great one. I think some of the greatest moments in American history certainly started with like whispered conversations in private spaces. And so that's a big part of it. A big motivation for me, honestly, is keeping folks doing really high consequence national security work safe. That's my background. That's where I grew up. I'm really heavily motivated by building tech to keep those folks safe. And I also, the parking lot analogy is a little funny, but I do feel like a real sense of indignation at having to carry this thing around, like having to connect to this network every single day, all day, and just knowing the way that I'm being productized, being monetized, being compromised without any sense of control. There's like a sense of loss of control that the more I thought about it, and the more I sort of ruminated on the early ideas for the company, the more it grew. It didn't shrink over time.
Yeah, well, and it's stunning too, because most of these products we actually pay for. So we pay for these products and then they're secretly spying on us. And sure, maybe somewhere buried in the user license agreement, it says that they can do whatever they want with the data. But to your point, it's sort of a false trade-off because there is no, a couple of years ago, there was no cape, right, to choose instead.
We all made this deal with Mark Zuckerberg circa 2007, right? Like, we're not paying for the product, therefore we're going to be the product. And we all know that. Won't like it, but at least you know it. But you pay $70 a month.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm passionate about this one. It goes so much deeper too. It's Spotify, it's Amazon, it's every single company that you're doing business with, your data, your preferences, what you watched on YouTube. Yeah, it goes deep. Well, let me jump into the building of the company itself. So, a mobile software defined operator. So you're not building the towers, right? Which means that you've got to get access to the towers in order to be successful. Which means that at the time, a tiny startup with not much of a reputation yet in the earliest days has got to go win massive contracts with carriers like AT&T. How did you make that happen? Like, what was the
Yeah.
strategy to get in the door and get them to
Yeah.
take you seriously?
Yeah. And to say, like, to give you a sense of how naive we were, we had raised like $1.5 million. Right? And we just started knocking on AT&T's door and we are like, hey, we're a venture backed startup and we'd like access to your nationwide network and we're going to build a telco and we have $1 million in the bank. Uh, and almost no idea how expensive and how hard and how like the magnitude of the ask we're making to the telcos. It's hard. That conversation is hard because we're asking them to do something non-standard on their network, and these networks they have billions, hundreds of billions of dollars invested in, and it's literally their entire business is the network. And so it's harder than I thought to start. We got so lucky in that we hit on U.S. Cellular as a partner, and U.S. Cellular is the fourth largest carrier in the U.S. They are just scrappy enough to entertain kind of wild-eyed pitches from startups, and not just scrappy enough, but they have a real technical team that had built this nationwide IoT network. And so they had a real understanding of their own network, and because they had that sort of top to bottom technical understanding, they were able to engage in a real conversation about what we're trying to do rather than just categorize it as risky and discard it. And so, that was like one of the luckiest moments for the companies that we fell into this conversation or found ourselves in this conversation and found counterparts on the other side who have just been incredible.
But
Well,
did you find them? Was it like, I'm just going to start calling all the top carriers, or did someone make an introduction, or did you kind of think it through and say, okay, let's find the one that has the nerds that really care about security?
yeah, someday when we write the book, I will retroactively adopt a really deliberate strategy. In reality, one of the early things we learned, the entire founding team, Nick, David, Steve, and I all come from tech backgrounds, Palantir and Anduril, and not telco. We figured out pretty early on we needed a couple folks with real industry experience. So we're lucky to make some really good hires, and one of them, Emily Lyons, who negotiates all of our telco partnerships, understood the landscape better than we did and had some personal relationships at US Cellular, and just made this sort of considered observation that we should be talking to them. And she
Yeah.
was able to, get the first conversation right and sort of, she nailed it, basically.
I want to come back to the industry experience versus non-industry experience part in a little bit. But one other thing that I remember that you told me about US Cellular that's really interesting is, at least at the time, their network didn't support phone calls, right? It was only data. Is that correct?
Sort of. So to be clear, US Cellular has a consumer network that does support voice and data and all the rest. Separately, they have built an IoT, an Internet of Things network that uses all of their infrastructure, uses all of AT&T's towers, and then 12 regional carriers all around the country into this IoT network. And a really cool story their team told me early on that I love to share is they did all this work to assemble this network that has a really cool marketing claim, which is it's the densest network in the country. They have the highest tower density of any network of any of the big three or anyone else. What that means is if you go into a Bass Pro Shops and you look at the trail cameras, there's like these cameras you put out at night to take automatic pictures of deer coming down the trail or whatever. There's one that has an A in the corner you can buy. That's an AT&T enabled trail cam. They all use cellular connectivity. There's one that has a V in the corner, and that's a Verizon trail cam. And there's one that has an M in the corner. That's a circled M. It's more expensive. That stands for multi-carrier, and that's a US Cellular trail cam.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, right? So they have this super differentiated IoT network that they hadn't installed a component called IMS on, and that's the thing you need to run voice services over a data network in 4D. So this is long story short. Started talking to their team, and they said, "Look, we've got this amazing network. We haven't put an IMS on it. It's not on our immediate roadmap. But if you want to install the IMS, then we'll let you use the IoT network." Which is
Like if you guys install it for them.
which is right
This
here.
is so Palantir. I love this.
The whole
Okay.
point is we want to own as much as we can. It's like, we're not only will we do the IMS, we want to do the HSS, we want to do this, we want to do that. And they were just like, great. And so they signed us up, and now we're on this incredible nationwide network. I think they might be offering more voice services over it soon, but to my knowledge, we're the only ones offering voice services over it right now.
Yeah, I think the lesson for other startup leaders is, even when you think you can't break the doors down in a big company, if you can find like-minded individuals who care about the same things that you care about, even inside a big company, you might at least be able to have a conversation.
Yeah. It's the most, it happens time and time again. The counterpart or the counterparty is the most important part. If they're, if they're like-minded, if they believe in what you're trying to do, and they have a little bit of risk tolerance in their DNA, then then that's who you need to be working with.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a big organization. There's just an organization with lots of people in it. And some of those people are going to think like you if you can find them in the right culture.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
So the military use case here seems clear enough.
Sure.
I think you made that case really strongly. But how did you build conviction that it was worth also building a product for high risk individuals, privacy minded consumers? How did that come about?
Yeah, the market has sort of pulled us along at every turn. So we started out really in design partnerships with all these great national security customers doing really high consequence work. They really understand the threats that we're talking about. They'll tell you when you're solving them, and they'll tell you when you're not solving them. Really like tough first customer. And as we built that product, we started to get natural and organic pull from what we now call HRIs, high risk individuals. Folks maybe who are traveling to Ukraine, private citizens who are traveling to Ukraine for a variety of reasons. Executives who see the UHS CEO news or generally are super concerned about their privacy. And that caused us to slightly repackage and really rebrand that government really prototype at the time into the Obscura offering for HRIs. These are all the folks I just mentioned. We have partnerships with an organization that offers help to survivors of domestic violence who have really heightened threat profiles, journalists. There are a lot of people who have legitimately really heightened threat profiles when they connect to the cell network. And then doing that, so making that move into sort of commercial and executive and VIP and HRI use cases, we started to hear from those folks, hey, I also am concerned about my family. They don't need this, the F1 car that does all the really cool, some really neat stuff around identifier rotation and some things that we love and are very technically sophisticated, but not everyone realistically needs. And so we started to hear from folks, I would like to put my family on something like a more streamlined version, but that still has the minimized data collection, right? And SIM swap protection is a big one. And so that caused us to build into this broader consumer launch. I mean, we did a closed beta and it sold out in a few hours. We just opened up our beta again. We're starting to let more and more people in, and it's going great. And so it's really just sort of a natural progression. We go where we feel pull.
That's awesome. There's nothing like having the market pull you along at each phase as the best strategy. I often find myself talking to founders, telling them that if they're not feeling stuff like that, it's not necessarily that they're not great at being a founder. It's just that you're maybe not solving a problem that's the right problem yet, right?
But there is, it's very possible to be a great founder and a great person to have a great idea, but still no one want to buy it.
This episode is brought to you by Chaser. Chaser is a task management solution completely embedded in Slack. When teammates have requests for each other, it's no longer necessary to involve a project manager, add the issues to a task tracker, and remember to follow up. Right from within any Slack channel or message, with a few simple keystrokes, you can identify a message as a task for another person or yourself, and Chaser automatically tracks it and reminds the assignee of the work until it's done. We started using Chaser at First Principles to create stronger clarity on those important but less formal tasks that must happen to get from start to finish on a project, but that often don't arise until the middle of a discussion. We now spend less time context switching, and we're not dropping the ball on each other. Plus, there's great transparency into who does what in order to bring the team to success. Get a 14-day free trial at www.trychaser.com and use the code FP50 to get 50% off your first 3 months. So let's talk about the features a little bit. Besides the baseline privacy infrastructure, what are some of these novel features? I know some of them range from things that are, non-obvious, like what's currently happening with your voicemail on any normal carrier, to maybe some of the more less obvious ones.
Yeah. We started, the very first thing we set out to build and wound up building was taking control of all the identifiers on your phone. I shouldn't say all, the important identifiers on your phone. There's something called an IMSI, an International Mobile Subscriber ID. If you go buy a SIM card, there's a long number printed on it. That's your subscriber ID. There's another long number printed on the modem, like the antenna that your phone uses to connect to the network. That's called an IMEI. Your operating system has one called an ad ID. That's the number it sells to data aggregators in the ad industry. And so because those identifiers tend to be static and at varying times are communicated in the clear to the network, they're a really effective way to track you, kind of by design in the case of ad ID and by accident in the case of MZ and IMEI. But all of them are absolutely used to track your own network. So we built all this tech to decouple the identifier from the identity of the subscriber, mostly by rotating them, right? So we kind of bought 1,000 or 1,000,000 or whatever IMSIs, subscriber IDs from US Cellular, and put them all on prepaid unlimited data plans. So they're paid now, and US Cellular doesn't really care what we do with the individual ones. So we can just rotate them amongst our subscribers every couple of minutes. So everyone's always on a valid paid IMSI. It's just no longer correlated to their identity. So it's obfuscation. That's what the first thing we built. It's awesome. It's really cool. The most exquisite version of it requires a specific device to work. But that is what then opened the door to all these other use cases and all these other things and caused us to build things like encrypted voicemail. No one, including Apple, has your voicemails encrypted on the server, which is crazy when you think about it. Because number one, it's not that hard to do as long as you own a telco and are willing to build voicemail. Adding the encryption is sort of trivial. Easy for me to say because I'm not the engineer that built it, but
But
yeah.
there's standards. You can apply encryption to audio. That's not a big leap. Yeah.
It's another example, going back to your earlier question of how if you start from scratch and you just build with these principles and these goals in mind, you just sort of naturally encrypt voicemail along the way. It's a good, like, I didn't, put my CEO hat on and mandate that we're going to build encrypted voicemail. One of the engineers just raised his hands. Number one, I think we can build our own. And number two, it should be encrypted because no one's encrypting it, which is awesome.
Yeah, that's a great example of how the culture at the company generates the feature that actually that satisfies the user that believes in your mission.
Yeah.
And so it just comes together naturally instead of through some sort of like heavy management principles or something like that. Like, I think one of the challenges that you guys have is that you sell a product that in some ways has a similar profile to really great virus scan software, in that it's sort of like working best when people don't notice it day to day, right? Like if you don't get hacked, if your data doesn't end up leaked, if the Chinese government doesn't find you, then you're having a good day. How have you navigated showing consumers value when much of the value is locked under the hood in the form of things that haven't happened yet?
Yeah. It's such a good, question. I will say this: we've got some things on the roadmap coming soon that are solving real problems. We don't build things just like for marketing for optics, but also we'll do a much better job of showing that we're working on your behalf in the background. We've been so focused on the kind of nerdy technical solutions and making it. The hard part actually is making it transparent, right? We held as a principle from the beginning that our cell network has to work exactly like you expect your cell network to work, which is highly available. It's really fast and it kind of stays out of your way, and all your apps work, and you can use whatever phone you want. Works with your iPhone. That's the hard part. Now we're sort of circling back for, okay, how do we surface when we're doing
Yeah, how
it?
do you show them that their phone would have been an attack vector 12 times this month if not for you guys?
Yeah, I promised our head of product I wouldn't tease specific features on this podcast.
Of
So
course.
let's stand by.
Excellent, excellent. Looking forward to hearing about those. So let's circle back to the employees and the co-founders and the team. Tell us more about that decision not to initially hire telecom people. And then you mentioned maybe later on adding a couple of telecom people, which by the way sounds a little bit similar to the SpaceX story, where
Mm.
like at a certain phase they were like, yeah, it might be helpful to have a couple of rocket people here,
Yeah.
but mostly not rocket people. And then
Yeah.
everybody became rocket people. How did it work for you guys?
Um, I'm not sure it was ever a conscious decision not to hire telco people. It was more, I knew for sure the type of person we did, like the profile we wanted in the company was opinionated, highly technical, mostly like all engineers to start, passionate about the problem, motivated by building, unencumbered by the status quo and the traditional way of doing things. In general, it's hard to find those people in telco. It's such a mature, we'll say, industry, and there's not a ton of software engineering talent. There's not a ton of um, risk accepting startup DNA, kind of like distributed through the existing telcos. We've been lucky to find some real examples of that, and so we have some telco folks on the team now who are real startup people, but also with some background, which has been helpful. But in general, like the bet, I sort of made the initial survey of the landscape. Had the initial impression it was going to be hard to hire a lot of folks from telco that could really help us on our quest here, especially in the early days. So the bet was basically just hire top tier engineers, like recruit, find really, really excellent people, understand that they're probably gonna need some space and they're gonna break some eggs on the way to making their first omelet, which is a telco. But what is now paying off, the payoff is we have this incredible engineering, there's this team of world-class engineers who've also become experts in telco. And I don't know if anyone else in the world has that.
Yeah,
And
probably
probably
not.
just, yeah, we just finally out of the platform for them to build on also. So it's a really exciting time.
Does the team have any hacks for coming up to speed on complex new subject matter? Any learning tricks that you guys have developed over the journey?
You know, we forever have had a Udemy course in the onboarding, a 4G, 5G Udemy course. And I think it sticks around. It's become sort of a rite of passage. It's horrible. You know, it's like hours and hours and hours long. And it's the best one we could find, but it's still not that great. Um, but you have to go kind of end to end and learn all that and like get exposed to all the acronyms and all the concepts once. It turns out you don't actually need to know everything to be productive. Most people that have been in the industry 20 years don't understand the full stack. You need that once around the world, just painful, acronym heavy indoctrination. And then after that, it's like right into get someone a project. You know, now they've been, now that they've seen how gnarly the full picture is, just get them something specific, get them spun up, let them build something that is valuable and productive and that, you know, gets their feet wet.
You got to build your own content like Trey Stevens and I did back at Georgetown for the people going into the Intel community to help
Yeah,
them learn how to do analysis.
I think it's a great idea. I think even you would be shocked at the scope of trying to learn the 4G 5G stack from scratch.
I can't even imagine. I mean, I did some of the research in preparation for our podcast today, and it's a lot, man. There's a
Yeah,
lot of infrastructure, and I love learning new content, and I feel that way. So I'm impressed by you guys.
yeah. Oh, thanks. I appreciate it.
So look, your network probably has some similar challenges to Bitcoin in the early days, right? The more anonymous, the more attractive it is to criminals. How is Cape handling that challenge? It's obviously 180 opposite of what you founded the company for. So how do you make sure the technology doesn't end up in the wrong hands? How do you work with law enforcement?
Yeah. I mean, thanks first for starting with that's obviously not why you founded the company. Not everyone like adds that caveat when they ask the question. So I appreciate that. It's definitely true. Um, it an important feature of starting a telco is that it's a highly regulated space. So that certainly is a double-edged sword, and there are challenges associated with that. One of the benefits is it's very clearly laid out for us what we need to be able to produce, what we need to be able to do in order to satisfy our obligations to law enforcement. Most of that lives in a law called CALIA, or 100% CALIA compliant. Um, what I'll say is um, you can only produce, you can only share with law enforcement what you collect. We collect a lot less than our competitors in the space than the big telcos, and we retain it for a lot less time. We also have a policy which is to push back, as is our right under the law, to push back when we think that requests from law enforcement are not narrowly tailored or not properly constructed.
Yeah. So you're kind of doing your own know your customer work that you're required to do by law in the first case, just to evaluate the customers. And then, of course, for law enforcement requests, you're providing what you need to legally provide, but you're also making sure that you're respecting, well, you can only provide the stuff that you've actually collected. So it doesn't come up as often for you guys as I think what I'm hearing.
I think that's right. Well, on the first piece, I mean, there's know your customer. Certainly, I think it'd be relatively rare for our government customers to be subject to CALIA requests. Outside of that, you know, there aren't actually know your customer requirements to like sell a SIM card to somebody in the United States. It's not like that everywhere in the world, but it's true in the United States. But yeah, we satisfy all the requirements at onboarding and all the way through to responding to requests.
Interesting. Okay. What about when customers go overseas? I didn't understand this before we ever talked about Cape, but my understanding is that the roaming infrastructure deeply depends on touching foreign towers, right? So how does that work?
It does. First, most importantly, it does work as of very recently. Our international network is live. So we work.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
That does not sound like a small feat at all.
Like everything, it was many times harder than we thought it was going to be. But it's live, which is great. And you're right that just like when you travel around the United States, you're necessarily touching the towers of the whichever carrier built them and operates them. The same is true overseas. And then varying country by country, sometimes you're not only touching the physical infrastructure, but you're also traversing their software, their core network. And so we're able to provide most of the same protections exactly as they work out of the box. As an example, encrypted voicemail, SS7 in diameter protection, SIM swap protections, all that stuff follows you wherever you go, as well as minimal data retention, our call data records, the stuff we report to foreign telcos that our subscribers roam on, looks significantly different and is less detailed than the ones produced by a major telco in the US. So we're reporting a lot less data to the local telco than our competitors.
Do they care? Like, are they asking you to pay a higher roaming fee or something
I
in
mean,
exchange for that?
we'll see as it scales, but out of the gate, no. And they care that you pay them for every gigabyte that you use. They don't really care which subscriber used which gigabyte. That information is important to the owning telco because they want to spot runaway usage, especially in expensive overseas markets. Like if you go to Djibouti, where roaming rates are really, really high, and you start streaming Netflix, you can put a real hurt on whoever your, AT&T or whoever your home network is in the United States. So they care about that kind of stuff. But they just want to get paid for the gigs.
Okay, so I'm noting when I am mad about my cell phone bill, book a flight to Djibouti and stream all of the Wire old episodes. Excellent, excellent. Um, Standing back on the whole thing that you guys have built, building a telco from scratch, enormous technical, logistical, capital intensive feat. What were some of the biggest problems that you had to solve? What have you guys learned just reflecting on that experience?
Yeah. I mean, almost all of um, the hard problems came from third-party dependencies. We have obviously the 800-pound gorilla of third-party dependencies is our underlying network. We need a carrier partner who will turn us on nationwide and then internationally. But you can't build. I think it was not the right approach to try to build every bit and byte from scratch on your journey. You wind up buying certain things off the shelf because they're not core to the value proposition, and it's impossible to imagine building literally every piece of the stack from the start. But each time you do that, each time you buy something off the shelf, you've now taken on a third-party dependency. And honestly, like in an industry where not all the off-the-shelf solutions are super well supported or super great to work with, especially the SREs and software engineers who hold a certain standard to themselves and to others in terms of what software should look like. So it's just been hard. It's like a lot of glass chewing to get all the pieces put together to actually get it initially live. I think that's the hardest part. Great software engineers want to build and they want to have the best tools and the best environment and the best sort of like conditions in which to build cool stuff. And it's hard to give them that in telco.
Yeah, until you get through some of these big partnership challenges and getting agreement and figuring out how it's going to work. That makes sense. What about for you personally as a founder? I mean, obviously, we learned a lot together in our Palantir years. It kind of makes people feel invincible, I would argue, like coming out of the Palantir culture when you first leave. But you must have learned some things. You must have some new cheat codes as a founder that maybe you didn't appreciate when you first left Palantir. What are some of those reflections?
Man, what are the new cheat codes is a good question. I don't have a ready-made answer to. I would say, so an interesting thing about Palantir, um, the things we kept, the things I kept, the things we kept as a company are an emphasis on ownership, right? Like empower people to be autonomous, make decisions. Encrypted voicemail is a really good example of how that happens. Don't, squash that. You encourage that. I think that Palantir had such a strong bias against insiders. The context is a little different. We had such a hard time wrapping our heads around hiring people that understood how the government worked, right? Like how government procurement work or government sales worked, which in retrospect sounds a little insane, right? But at the time it was just like, seemed like the only way to do it. And maybe it was, but I think maybe a cheat code that we employed in a Cape was not being dogmatic about that and holding open the idea that there probably are some people with real telco backgrounds that can help us on our quest, and make things go a little faster for us. And that is borne out really well.
I think the irony of that statement is that in practice, I remember that a ridiculous number of forward deployed engineers at Palantir actually did come out of the systems integration market, but they happened to be the one or two people per thousand within those ecosystems that actually did want to break the mold, try something
Totally.
new, be
Yeah.
scrappy, move fast. No, nobody ever said like, well, back at Northrop Grumman, the way we handled things was
Yeah.
right. It was almost like, where did you work before this?
Yeah.
Yeah,
God, I know where I dropped out of high school and traveled the world for 7 years.
that's right. That's right. Teal Fellowship straight in. Yeah. Okay. So what comes next for Cape on this journey?
Yeah. I mean, so beta, beta, we got one internally as the starting line. All the pieces are there. We're a functioning telco. People are buying it, which is awesome. And now, we've got a ton of stuff we want to build. There's some really cool, the features we're going to market with now, I think are awesome and they solve real problems. We've had to do the thing all startups have to do along the way, which is aggressively prune the features and just get the thing live. But now that we're live, there's all kinds of stuff I want to get after. So the next year is gonna be a lot of fun.
Where can people sign up?
At cape.co, cape.co.
Awesome, John. It's been fantastic having you on here. This is just such an interesting topic, and I can't wait to get my own hands on a Cape plan myself in the future.
Cool. Adam, thanks, man. Always a pleasure to talk to you. I think what you're doing with the podcast is awesome. And yeah, I think it's really cool to be a part of it. So thanks for
Thanks so
having
much for your support. Take care.
us. See you.
Thank you so much for listening. Emergent is brought to you by First Principles, where we provide emerging technology product coaching and fractional product leadership to founders with bold visions. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please consider leaving a review or sharing feedback directly with us. You can always find previous episodes, show notes, and more content on www.emergentproduct.com.